Hello, everyone. My name is Brooklyn Myers, and I am an Elixir newbie. My goal is to help people adopt Elixir and grow as developers while doing the same myself. I do that by documenting and sharing my own experience in the Elixir industry. It's been an incredible journey so far, and I look forward to taking the next step with you. So, let's jump in to the Elixir Newbie Podcast. I've been mentoring junior developers lately and watching them struggle to find their first job opportunity. And I'm starting to see some common patterns in the things that cause people to struggle to find their first development job. And today I thought it would be interesting to talk about some of the same advice that I'm sharing with these people to help them find their first job, and relay that to you so that either you can help other developers who are looking for their first gig and trying to get into the programming industry, or if you are an Elixir newbie and you're trying to find a programming job yourself, you can take these strategies and apply that to your own job search. I do also think that there's going to be some information here that is useful for pretty much anyone who is trying to look for work or will be trying to look for work that's in programming, especially if your current strategy for finding work is using job boards and hitting up sites like Indeed or different online places where you can find work. If that's your current strategy for finding programming jobs, then I think there's going to be some useful information in here as well for you. So it seems like a common experience that as a first-time developer, you are taught the basic skills or taught yourself the basic skills, and then you're in a place where you're looking for work. And the way to find work, as far as you're aware, what's available is to build some sort of resume, maybe some sort of portfolio site, and then use those tools to apply to jobs online and find job ads. And the reason that as a first-time dev, that is a failing strategy is whenever you apply to those sorts of jobs, those jobs are completely public and available. Every developer that wants to find work can access them. And so a company who puts that out is receiving stacks and stacks of resumes. And as a first-time developer, it's going to be really challenging to stand out in that environment. You're essentially a small fish in a big pond. You're competing with people who have more experience, or let's be honest, have lied about their experience, have padded their resume, and hopefully that's not something that you're doing yourself, but realistically, you're competing based off of experience, but you don't have your first experience yet. And so, of course, that's going to be a game that you lose, but there are other ways of finding work that are far more suited to your strengths as a junior. And your strengths as a junior are that you are excited, that you have high potential, that you have a good attitude, that you are open to the ways that the company does it. Often whenever you hire a more experienced developer, they have a particular style, they have things that they're used to. And so as a company, it can be a fantastic thing hiring a more junior developer because they are a sponge and they will just take all of the different practices that you employ, all of the different patterns that you adopt, and they will do it the way that you have suggested and recommended because they're learning. And so of course they're just taking this information. They don't have competing opinions that make them less easy to work with. And from my own experience, I struggled with this as well when I was trying to find my very first developer gig. I think I've told some of this story before, where my very first developer gig, I honestly got lucky. I knew a friend and he helped me get into the programming industry. But before that, I had spent several months unemployed. I had been continuously hammering at job boards. I've been feeling incredibly discouraged. That feeling of putting yourself out there and being continuously rejected, it sucks. It is not a good experience, and it's something that I think can very easily discourage developers from ever getting into programming because they just couldn't get over that first step of becoming a developer. And honestly, I think that first job is the hardest part about programming. Once you have your first job, everything from there is just a steady climb. And you can climb fast or you can climb slow, but you've got your foot into the door of the programming industry, and from there you'll have opportunities and experiences handed to you. Essentially, after your first year, maybe 2 years in programming, you start to be hit up so much by recruiters that you don't even need to look at job ads anymore or any of these other platforms, because you're actually so in demand, other people will reach out to you. But when you're aspiring, when you're looking for your first opportunity, the experience is the exact opposite, where it's so hard to find those opportunities, at least through the typical path, that it's very easy to think, well, this is just impossible, and unfortunately drop out of the programming industry. And you do see that occasionally. So hopefully I'm going to talk about some strategies that will let you stop looking at job boards and start trying some alternative methods. And the hope is that you're going to have more success with that. And now the strategies that you employ are going to be different depending on what stage of this process that you're at. So I'll talk about the very first. The very first stage is that you are trying to find job interviews, but people aren't getting back to you. So you're not actually getting into the room where you can have a conversation with people. You're at a stage where, likely you're firing off tons of resumes online and no one is really getting back to you. You don't have a very good response rate. And so your goal in that situation is not necessarily to find a job. Of course, that's the higher end goal, but your immediate goal is to figure out how to get more interview opportunities and how to get in the room so that you can start getting feedback. And from there, it's figuring out how to make those interviews go well so that you can actually get a job. But the first step is simply figuring out how do you get lots of interviews. And it's very easy to diagnose yourself and figure out what stage of this you're at, because if you are interviewing every single week and getting lots of interviews, well, okay, you're at a stage where you're getting into the room, but something about how you're presenting or how that interview goes isn't going well or isn't going correctly, and you're not receiving offers. But if you're never doing interviews at all and it's just silence, that's a different problem. So I'm going to talk about that problem first, and then we can talk maybe a bit about how to have success when you are in an interview and how to go about doing that. So I've already talked about why going on job ads and putting up your resume, although it's a very fast experience, you can often fire them out very quickly. It's not going to have a very good response rate because, like I said, you're being put onto that pile. You're not going to be particularly competitive when it's your first job, and so you're going to keep losing that game. So what is the alternative way for finding work? And the secret is that most programming jobs are never publicly advertised. That's something that a company does if they didn't already receive a candidate a lot of the time. At least that's my experience, is that most companies will start by hiring internally, and they'll ask everyone else in the company, hey, we're looking to fill a position. Do you know anyone? And so a lot of jobs that are out there are available by having a strong network and knowing people in the industry. And even if you don't already know people in the industry, you can still find those opportunities. You just have to be, I want to say somewhat resourceful, but I actually think that this strategy is easier than applying to jobs online. So I don't want to sell this like it's this extremely hard thing. All you need to do is, what I recommend is you go to sites like LinkedIn, search for either companies that are using the technology that you use. In this case, I'm going to recommend Elixir, of course, or look for developers who are using that technology and figure out what company they're a part of. Do a little bit of research and see just early, would you have any interest in that company? So if you're open to remote work, this is of course a lot easier because then most companies become available to you. If you're looking for local work, you'd have to limit it to whatever your local area is. But either way, finding people on LinkedIn that are working in Elixir and working in a company that you are interested in, and then reaching out to them directly. And they don't need to be a hiring manager, and the message that you send doesn't need to be, please give me a job. The message that you send should be, hey, I notice you work at company XYZ. I am interested in potentially working for that company. Can you tell me a little bit about what your experience has been like there? Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And you're not pitching it as, do you mind if I beg you for a job? You're pitching it as, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Because what you really want to do is figure out early on, is this a company that you would be interested in working for? And so if they come back to you, and most people will say yes, because most people are excited that someone bothered to send the message and ask them some questions that isn't, trying to sell them something or something like that. And when they get back to you, if the feedback is, you know what, I hate it here, it's like, cool. Now you never needed to go through the job interviews. You never needed to, you got to pre-filter that company out. But if their feedback is, yeah, I love it here, it's great, here's what's great about it, then you can start a conversation with them and ask them any questions that you might have about the company. Ask them about what it's like there and the culture, and maybe if you're curious about some of how the technology works, how the teams are broken up, what the kind of day-to-day looks like. Do they test? Are there any learning programs or cool things like that? You can just ask them a few questions. Of course, you don't want to take up tons and tons of their time, but ask them a couple questions, and then ask, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to help share this with me. Like I said, I'm looking for work and potentially looking to work at this company. Is there anyone that you recommend that I reach out to? And so what that does is now this person who you have gotten to chat with, hopefully are having a good time with, now they will let you know, oh, here's the specific person you should get in touch with. And so if that job wasn't publicly available, now you've found the person who you can reach out to actually get an opportunity. And oftentimes what they'll actually say is, yeah, let me introduce you to the person responsible for hiring. And so now you have an introductory email that is a lot more of a warm introduction. If there's someone who is already from the company who's recommending you, and you're going to have a lot easier of a time getting past that early phase where, and I recommend this even for a company that you did find through a job ad. So if you're going to apply to a company through a job ad, rather than applying through that ad, find other people who work at that company, speak with them directly, ask them a few questions, and then ask them if you know how you can potentially apply. And again, oftentimes, if they just say, just go through the application online, it's like, okay, fine. But oftentimes they'll just introduce you to the person who's responsible for this stuff, and you never need to go through that early phase of filtering out people's resumes. And so you're able to skip the queue. On top of that, it'll lead to increased success when you're actually in the interview, because now another person, or potentially if you chatted with multiple people from that company like you and know you and are familiar with you, and that is going to increase your chances of getting a job. And now, one of the common things I've seen juniors or first-time devs, I should say, struggle with and feel, and something that I felt myself when I was a first-time dev, is this feeling that there is so much to do, but you don't know what the next thing you should do is. So should you improve your resume? Should you build up a portfolio site? Should you start working on projects? Or should you be dedicating all of your time to looking for work? That's not really going very successful, but is that just a result of not spending enough time on it? What's the plan of action there? And you don't really know what the next truly important thing is to do. And the great thing about this process is if you can follow the process I just outlined as a way to get interview opportunities. And to be clear, I have done this without ever sending off a resume. I've managed to get an intro interview and they didn't even have my resume. So this is an experience agnostic thing that you can do that will often get your foot into the door, and you'll never be filtered out based off of your experience. And so because you're now finding ways to get into the room for an interview, the question of what should you do next kind of evaporates, because what you can actually do if you want to still work on your experience as a developer, still build up your resume, but also be looking for work, is what many companies do as part of their hiring process is at some point they give you a technical challenge. And this can be a take-home task. Sometimes it's an in-person challenge. And by completing this challenge, you'll actually be building your skill as a first-time dev. And if you ask them beforehand, you can often put this on your GitHub and it can become a resume piece. That additional pressure of having a deadline, because often they say, hey, can you do this in a week? Will make it so that you can accomplish it in a reasonable amount of time as well. Because one of the things as a junior is you often pick projects not really knowing how much time they're going to take. I've seen juniors struggle for months and months and months on the same project, whereas these are designed to be quick, completable, and similar to the type of work often that you're going to be doing in the real job. Sometimes they're not, but often they are designed to be a challenge that you can accomplish. They say in a few hours. Being more realistic, often these things take you about a week of work depending on your previous level of experience. If you're brand new and still figuring these things out, it is totally okay to take more time than they originally estimated it would take. Especially if what you're doing is you're using these technical challenges as a learning opportunity. You can use them as an excuse to try out new tools or try different patterns, and you want to be writing it with fairly high quality because you're going to be assessed on it. So knowing that someone is going to give you feedback on it, is going to review it, can kind of push you to new levels as a developer. And you're also not falling into that trap of tutorial hell. So if you don't know, I've talked about tutorial hell before. Essentially, it's this pattern that juniors can get stuck into where they're constantly going through tutorials, but they're never learning the skills they actually need to be able to find a job and do real dev work. And the thing about the technical challenges that companies give you is they've often tried to pick challenges that you can't find a one-to-one tutorial for. And so there is no tutorial. There's many that will teach you how to do similar things, but it often involves work that is more akin to what you do day to day in a development job, which is you're presented some sort of technical challenge and you need to have a deep enough understanding of the fundamentals to apply those fundamental tools to actually solve that challenge and accomplish your goal. So if you are able to get yourself into interviews and you're meeting with people, even if you're not yet at a place where they're considering you, sometimes you'll get feedback, which is, sorry, we're looking for seniors, and that's totally okay. I highly recommend that you take the time to ask them, hey, even if we're not a good fit, do you have some sort of technical challenge that you give out to candidates? Is that something you would be willing to give to me? And like I said, even if this isn't a good fit or it just doesn't work out, I would love to get to do that technical challenge. Worst case scenario, it's a great way for me to grow. Best case scenario, I knock it out of the park and you change your mind and decide to hire me. I find this can also help change your mindset about looking for work, because one of the things that can feel discouraging is if you walk into every experience hoping to get a job, you can feel like it's a constant failure because you went into one interview and it didn't lead to a job. You went into another interview and it didn't lead to a job. And you can feel like you're constantly facing rejection. But if you shift your mindset and say that the goal is not the job, the goal is the experience of the interview, this can help your mentality when you're walking in. So you'll be more comfortable because at the end of the day, if you get the job, great. If you don't, that's totally fine too. And it'll also mean that you're asking for things that are going to lead to a future job. In this case, asking for this technical challenge and asking for direct feedback. Often in an interview where you're trying to, for lack of a better word, seem impressive, you're scared to ask questions that make you look dumb. But we're developers. We need to ask questions that make us look dumb. That's how we figure out how to do things. And if you're not too concerned about that particular interview going exactly well, you'll be more comfortable asking questions that would lead to you actually growing. And you'll be more comfortable saying, hey, I don't know what that thing that you just said is. You said OTP. You said, what is that? Can you explain that to me? And you're taking the interview as a learning opportunity as opposed to just an opportunity to find a job. And that's going to make you more capable for whatever the next interview is. And honestly, I also don't think it's going to hurt your chances in that job. People like to see that you're comfortable not knowing things. That's something you have to do a lot as a developer. If a company wants someone who just knows everything, I don't think they're looking for the right person. If they want someone who can humbly admit, hey, I don't know anything about that, can you tell me about it? Then that's great. That's an attitude that people should be looking for. Now, I'm going to answer a couple of questions I got. There's no real segue for these questions. They're just kind of on their own and isolated, so I'm just going to insert them here. But I have had some of the juniors that I'm mentoring ask me, do you need a portfolio site? And is that something you should put a lot of effort into? And I have a bit of a biased opinion because I don't have a portfolio site. That is never something where throughout my life I've constantly asked, what is the next most important thing? A portfolio site has never been the answer to that question. It's never been necessary for me to find work. It's never been an important thing. No one has ever asked to see my portfolio site. I know that most people only really half read your resume anyway. So spending a bunch of time on a portfolio site wasn't ever strictly necessary. Now, I technically have and am in the process of making kind of a portfolio site because I'm making the elixirnewbie.com website, and that is going to function essentially as a portfolio site for me and as a site for resources and a site for Elixir Newbie, of course. But it's never been strictly necessary for me to make a portfolio site. It's something that I think a lot of people tell you to spend time on when you're a first-time dev, and you might not need to. So here's some counter advice. Do what you will. If you think it's important for you to have a portfolio site, then that's totally fine, and you can spend your time on that. But if you don't already have enough projects to put on your resume, I wouldn't recommend taking the time to make a portfolio site whose goal is to list all of your projects. Oftentimes, if you start by making a portfolio site, you'll be unhappy with the amount of experience you have on there months later, and you'll need to update it anyway. So I think it's something that personally you can put onto the back burner. You can let it sit. You don't need to do it right away, and that's perfectly fine. And if it comes up where it's something that is important, then great, you can do it then. The other question I see a lot of is, should you apply for jobs that have senior in the title? And the common thread of advice I see in the programming community at large is, yes, people don't know what they're talking about when they say senior, just apply anyway. And there's probably other pieces of advice, but that's kind of what I have predominantly heard coming from other people in the community. And my advice is pretty similar to that, although there's a slight tweak to it. The answer is still yes, but the way you should approach it is, if you find a job ad that says senior, again, use that same process. Find people in the company, speak with them directly, and then you might find out that they actually have opportunities for juniors, or you may be the person to create an opportunity because you came forward to the company and said, hey, I'm looking for a first-time gig. The company wasn't specifically hiring for a new developer, but now that they have one who has shown that they're resourceful, shown that they're eager, well, they might consider hiring you for a position even if they weren't going to create that position anyway, now that you're there. So even if there isn't an opportunity for you for that senior gig, by meeting with the company and letting them know you exist, basically, you might get to find or create an opportunity that just wasn't being advertised. As well, by having this meeting with the company, even if you find out, hey, sorry, it's not a good fit right now, months down the line, when they're looking for a less experienced developer, you might be the first person that they consider. So even if it doesn't go as planned and you're not able to interview for a senior developer position, you might still be able to meet with them and, like I said, get that technical challenge. And you might also be considered for a different position or a future position. So there's lots of benefit that can come from it if you approach it in a slightly different way. I don't recommend applying to job boards if that is a waste of your time. If you're going to job boards and putting out 10 applications and getting no responses, I don't think the answer to that is we'll just do it more. The answer to that, in my estimation, is figure out a method of looking for work that gets you a higher response rate. And in this case, it's this process I recommend of reaching out to people directly. And before I move away from the topic, if you are doing technical challenges, you might be looking for work while you already have a job. You might have responsibilities and demands on your time. And sometimes these companies will give you deadlines that just aren't really feasible. They'll say, hey, can you have this done in a week? And you look at your schedule and it's like, well, you're only really going to be able to carve out maybe 3 or 4 hours. That might not be enough to really do a good job of it. And I've talked with people before who have said that made them feel scared to ask for more time. And so they just sacrificed their own sleep, their health. And I totally understand where they're coming from, because it can be kind of scary if you are really wanting a job to do anything that could put that at jeopardy. And I completely understand where you're coming from if that's the case. But I have done this myself, so I want you to know that you can do this. You can simply say, hey, that doesn't work for me. I need more time. I think I should be able to have it done in 2 weeks. And now, I'm not going to tell you that that will never result in a company saying, you know what, well, we had one person do it in a week, you did it in 2 weeks, so that's going to be the straw that tilts the scale in their favor. So, okay, bad things can happen. But I haven't had that happen myself. I haven't had any company say, nope, sorry, that's a problem. And in addition, if a company does come back and say, no, you have to do this, that's probably not a company that you want to work for. If they can't be respectful of your time and understand that they're asking for multiple hours from you, unpaid, so that you can do a technical challenge for them. You know, I don't know if I've publicly said this or not, but this is something that people who interact with me directly and talk about some of this stuff definitely know. I don't like technical challenges. I don't like take-home assignments. I don't think it's something that companies should do, particularly not for experienced developers. Experienced developers have code. If you want to see their code, you can see their code. And honestly, it is fairly disrespectful to ask someone who is juggling a job and life and everything else to do something for you that's going to take many hours completely for free. I just don't think that's a very respectful thing to ask for. I don't think it respects a candidate's time. However, that is definitely how the industry functions, and I do think it presents an opportunity for first-time developers. For first-time developers, getting these technical challenges is actually a great thing. It's a way for you to improve and develop your skills. So for first-time devs, it totally makes sense. I also want to add in a caveat that there are take-home assignments that are perfectly fine. I'm only speaking to when a company, their first bar to you getting the next interview is some sort of take-home assignment. They haven't put in time on their end to talk with you, or they haven't made it so that you can choose to, instead of doing their challenge, show them some of your own code as a substitute. If that's their first filtering mechanism, that they have many developers come in, have them all do large take-home assignments, and then pick a small few if they don't have some sort of early filtering, that's where I think this is something that companies really should reconsider, whether or not that's respectful of a potential candidate's time, whether or not that's a good way to start a relationship is by demanding a lot of someone's time. And of course, there are also technical challenges that are not massive time investments and can be done in 30 minutes to a couple of hours, as opposed to something that is going to take you a huge time investment if you want to do a good job of it. So there's nuance here. I'm not trying to call out every company who has take-home assignments. There are take-home assignments that are perfectly fine. There are just moments where I think that people should reconsider if it's actually a valid mechanism for assessing people. But when I'm personally looking for work, I see that someone has given me a fairly, meaty technical challenge that is going to take many hours if I want to do a good job. And there is a little part in my brain that goes, man, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend 8 hours on this, because that's what I know it's going to take if I want to write this with a fully comprehensive test suite, use it to experiment with some cool patterns. And, if I have to do 3 or 4 of those in a week, that can be a lot of my time. I've had weeks where suddenly all of my time is full just doing these technical challenges. So more out of necessity than anything, I had to start asking people, hey, I know you wanted me to do this in about a week. I think I'm going to be able to get it done in 2. And just having that conversation of, hey, I need to extend the deadline. That's just how it is. And so far, that hasn't presented any problem for me. That hasn't resulted in any negative feedback or stopped me from moving further along the process. So if you are struggling to meet the demands and you're feeling like one thing I've seen is that people will just put an unfinished version of the project out early because they felt like they needed to hit that deadline. And the thing is, these people are asking you to do this for free. So there is no deadline. It's not real work. It doesn't need to happen next week. And so it's totally fine to ask for more time, especially if you look at it right away and ask for more time. If you ask for more time and it's the day of the deadline, that's fine too, but it doesn't look as good as if you can take the initial estimate where they say, hey, can you do this in a week? And you immediately respond, a week looks tough. I think I can do it in 2. Does that work for you? And that'll mean that you're going to be less stressed. If you have lots of interviews on your plate and you have lots of these technical challenges on your plate, you're not going to be absolutely crushed for time. Of course, if you are unemployed and you do have a lot of free time and you're able to just do these challenges, this doesn't really pose a problem for you. This is more advice if you are feeling like you can't manage the time expectations and you're having to overstress yourself in order to complete these challenges. It is totally fine to ask for a time extension. Do ask for a time extension. Keep your own time and keep your mental health good, because no one wants to be overstressed with what is technically fake work. Alrighty, well, that is going to be it for this episode of the Elixir Newbie Podcast. Hope you learned a lot. Hope you got some good strategies for getting more interviews and how you can use those interviews to teach yourself and grow, and hopefully it all leads to getting a job. If you are struggling with that process and looking for some more specific feedback, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Brooklyn J. Myers, and hope you have a great rest of your week. I will catch you on the next episode.